Hello and welcome to this tutorial for Canon's PTZ range. We're going to be talking about the different models, their features, how to set them up, and how to get the most out of them using the different controllers and applications. This video is designed for live stream producers, for camera operators, and for other camera enthusiasts who are excited to learn more about what these can do. My name's Rowan and I run a video production company called Southpoint Films based in Southampton in England. We're a video production and live streaming company, and for the past decade we've been working on all kinds of video production projects, from small corporate conferences and webinars through to some of the biggest music festivals in the country. And we've used PTZs to greatly enhance our productions. For me, the top line benefits of PTZs starts with three letters, PTZ, pan, tilt and zoom. And that's really the most important thing about these cameras, is that you can control those three things, the pan, the tilt, the zoom, basically all of the framing without needing an operator stood at the camera itself. They could be operating it remotely with a controller from a desk or chair somewhere else in the venue, or even, potentially, somewhere else across the globe. Another amazing benefit of these cameras is that they also let your operators multitask, whether that's one operator controlling multiple cameras, or someone who's doing something completely different, like switching between video signals, controlling what the camera is looking at any given time. It makes your production so much more efficient. And finally, my personal favourite benefit of them all, which is automation, which takes your productions to a completely new level. With automation, you can start setting these cameras up to do things on their own without any input from you. Whether that's setting up presets that move the camera from one place to another automatically, or going to the next level by setting the cameras to auto-track someone who's delivering a presentation or a talk, your productions will change forever. Now let's talk about the specific models in the Canon PTZ range, starting with the Canon CRN 100. This entry-level PTZ packs a punch with its 1/2.3-inch sensor up to 4K 30p. It can output video over IP, HDMI, and USB video as a webcam. Next, we have the CRN 300, which has all the same features as the 100, but includes 3G SDI and Wi-Fi. As we move up to the higher end of the line, we have the CRN 500, which is capable of 4K at 30p with its 1-inch type 4K sensor. This camera has HDMI output, video over IP, and 3G SDI. And finally, at the top end of the line, we've got the Canon CRN 700, which also has a 1-inch type 4K sensor, but is capable of 4K at 60p. Its outputs are HDMI, video over IP, 3G SDI and 12G SDI. There are also outdoor versions of the CRN 300 and CRN 700 which are designed to stand up against harsher environments. These cameras can be controlled using LAN Ethernet, which means that you can control them using a standard computer with a web browser and an Ethernet connection, one of Canon's dedicated controllers, the RCIP100 or RCIP1000, or you can use a third-party controller solution. Because these cameras are based on IP, you can actually control them with multiple methods, for example a controller and a computer. As a bonus, although we're focused solely on the PTZ range for this video, you can actually use a lot of these techniques to control other cameras on the Canon XC protocol. For example, the C70, the C300 Mark III, the C500 Mark II, and the XF605. You just won't be able to control the pan and tilt functions on those. Now let's start talking about how to actually get these cameras set up. First of all, you'll need your PTZ camera or cameras of choice, an Ethernet network switch for IP communication, ideally one with power over Ethernet, as this will supply power to your cameras, as opposed to needing to use a separate power adapter. A computer or your preferred controller such as the RCIP100 or the RCIP1000, a Cat6 or higher Ethernet cable for each of your devices, SDI, HDMI or USB-C cables for your cameras so that you can connect them to video switchers, recorders or a computer. Each of these cameras has a standard 1/4-inch tripod thread, which makes it easy to use it with equipment you might already own, such as tripods and mounts. Just make sure that anything you mount these cameras to is stable enough to take the weight of the camera and also tolerate the camera moving around on top. And if you're mounting the camera somewhere where it's suspended, such as on scaffolding or poles, make sure you use the supplied safety bond. And make sure that the camera is free of any obstacles. The lens does protrude ever so slightly over the base, so you just want to make sure there's plenty of space around the camera so that when it turns, it's not going to get knocked into anything or caught up and tangled. Now that you've got everything you need, start by plugging each device into the network switch with an Ethernet cable. If you're using power over Ethernet, the green light on the front will start flashing for up to a minute and then turn a solid green once the camera is fully powered up and ready to be used. If you're not using power over Ethernet, this is the time to plug in the external power supply. If you're using a controller, connect power and Ethernet to that and switch it on. Or if you're using the RC IP1000, you will only need to use an Ethernet cable if you have an appropriate power over Ethernet switch. And finally, if you're using a video switcher or recorder, connect your camera to this with HDMI or SDI. We're now going to look at setting up and operating these cameras with a computer, which is one of the simplest ways of doing it out of the box, as it doesn't require a controller. Now don't forget, although many of these cameras have SD card slots on the back, that's not for recording internally. If you want to capture images from these cameras, you'll need an external recorder. As I've mentioned previously, all of these cameras can be controlled over an IP network. This makes it really easy to control them, but I will admit that IP networking can be quite complex if you're not too familiar with it. For me, when I'm using these cameras, I like to keep them on their own separate network rather than trying to plug them into the network ports that might be at the venue I'm working from. This way, no matter where I go or what I'm doing, I can just take them out of the box, plug them into my switch, and everything should work as I'd set it up. Of course, this isn't the only way you can do it, so if you are more familiar with this type of work, then you may find a more efficient way for doing what you want to do, but just for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to keep it simple. To find the PTZ cameras on your network, Canon provides a camera search tool which can be downloaded from their website. I've already installed this on my computer, which is a Mac, which I'm going to be using for demonstration purposes, but you can also use it on a Windows PC too. And most of the functions that I'm going to show you, you can find equivalently on your PC. Start by opening the camera search tool. You should see, when it opens, a list of all of the devices on your network. But if for some reason this doesn't appear, click the search camera button and it will refresh the list. If you're still having troubles, something that I find to be quite useful is turning off the Wi-Fi on your computer and making sure that the computer is only using the Ethernet connection going to the switch that your PTZs are on. If all goes to plan, you'll see a list of your cameras in the tool. And the thing that you want to look at mainly is the IPv4 address. You can use IPv6, but for people just getting started with networking, I prefer to just keep it simple and use IPv4. You'll also see at the end the model name of your devices so that you can check that you've got all the devices that you're expecting in the list. Once you've got the IP addresses visible, go to the network settings for your computer and go to the settings for the Ethernet connection that's going to your switch. I'm just going to move the camera search tool over slightly so I can see the IP addresses of my cameras. And now I'm going to set the IP address for my computer by going into the network settings here. For IPv4, you'll want to make sure that this is set to a manual configuration. The first thing you'll need to enter is an IP address. Now, it's really important that your IP address matches those of your PTZs, except for the very last digits behind the final full stop, which is the unique number for the device on your network. So I'm going to give my computer the IP address of 192.168.100, which is exactly the same as my PTZs, and then give it a unique number that doesn't match the cameras in the list in the camera search tool. So I'm going to give my laptop the number 10, which is different. Then you'll need to enter your subnet mask. By default for all of these PTZs, the number is 255.255.255.0. And then router can be left blank. You can also ignore your IPv6 settings unless you're going to set that up as well. And you'll see once I save my network settings, if I go back to the camera search tool and refresh, all of my IPv4 addresses in the camera search tool are now links. When you click on a link, it will now take you to the settings for the camera. So the camera I'm currently connected to is the CRN100, which we've just taken out of the box, so it hasn't been configured at all. As you'll see on the screen here, it's asking us to enter a username and password. This keeps the camera locked down so that other people on your network can't control important functions of the camera without you knowing. I'm going to put in a username admin, and I'm going to give it a password, which I'm going to keep secret because don't share your passwords. Okay, I've put my password in now, and it's happy that both the passwords match. I'm also going to leave my language set as English, and then I'm going to click apply and reboot, and this will set those settings on the camera. The camera will take a couple of seconds to reboot, and then once it's back, enter the username and password that you just set. Now the camera will give you some other important settings to configure, starting with the frame frequency, which for me, being based here in the UK, I'm going to set as 25. I can set the network, which I'm going to set to manual so that I can give it a unique IP address so it doesn't conflict with any of my other cameras and devices. So I'm going to change that last digit to 6, which is different from all of the other devices. You can check the camera search tool to make sure that you're not about to give it a conflicting address. I'm going to leave the subnet mask as its default. And finally, you can set the date and time settings to make sure it matches your time zone, which you can choose from the list at the bottom. Once you're happy that you've got those configured correctly, click Apply and Reboot at the top. This reboot can take up to a minute. While you're waiting, check the light on the front of the camera, and once it turns solid green again, you can reconnect. Now our camera has rebooted, as we can see from the solid green light on the front. Return to your computer and the camera search tool, and refresh the list. Now find your camera from the list, and open the IP address from the IPv4 address list. You'll now be taken to the camera's browser application, which lets you control all of the features and functions of this camera. You'll see here at the top that you've got a preview of what the camera is looking at. You can reframe the camera by using the sliders and the buttons around the sides. You can change the pan, the tilt, and the zoom. You can also move the camera to focus on an area by clicking the preview. In the bottom half of the interface, you'll see that there's tabs for setting the exposure, the white balance and color, the image quality, tuning the image quality details, changing your focus settings, your PTZ settings, and also configuring presets. And if at a later date you want to change any of the system settings, you can click the menu in the top right hand corner, click System, and you'll be able to change all of the settings for the camera, many of which we'd just configured during the setup. I've found this interface to be incredibly intuitive in my own experience, and I'm sure that after a few minutes of poking around and seeing what things do, you'll feel like a pro with it in no time. Now that you've set up your PTZ using a computer, you can start using your RC IP100 controller if that's how you plan to operate your PTZ. Personally, I really like this controller because it gives your operators a much more tactile way of using the PTZ. It has 2 user assignable buttons, 3 function dials, a zoom rocker, and a joystick. So your PTZ operator could be using a PTZ one-to-one with these functions as if they are actually stood behind the camera, but somewhere more comfortable, such as at a desk or a table or in another room. Another great thing about this controller is that you can control multiple PTZs from one place using these camera control functions at the bottom where you can move between different cameras and camera groups. So your PTZ operator could be stationed somewhere with a multi-view of their different camera feeds and can move between cameras to control their individual framing and positioning. It's a really efficient way of working. To set up the controller, tap Settings, Network, and then Controller. And like the cameras, you'll be presented with the option to add an IP address, a subnet mask, and a default gateway. I find it's really handy to have the camera search tool open on a computer nearby so that you can set an IP address that doesn't conflict with your cameras. So in this case, I'm going to set an IP address of 192.168.100 to match my PTZs because that section needs to be the same. And then finally at the end, I'm going to give it a unique number that is independent for this device, completely separate for the PTZ. This number should be between 1 and 255. So I'm going to give it the number 11. For subnet mask, I'm going to set this as 255.255.255, and I'll leave it at 0. And I'm going to leave my default gateway blank because I don't need that for this configuration. Press Enter to save your settings, and then you can press Home to return to the controller's main interface. But before we get started, we're going to need to register our camera on the controller. So again, go to Settings, Network, Camera Registration. Because we're in control of the network we're using here, I'm going to set up my camera with the manual option. Now we can enter details about our camera. In this case, this is the first camera we're registering, so I'm going to leave it in camera group 1 as camera 1, but you can use these buttons to change it to camera 2, 3, 4, or change the group as well. For IP address, I'm going to use the camera search tool on my computer to look at the IP address of the camera I'm registering, which in this case is the CRN100, which has an IP address of 192.168.100.6. We can also enter the username for the camera, which in this case I'd written as admin. And then I'm going to press OK to confirm. And then the password I put as, you're not going to get me that easily. And now that my password is entered, I'm going to click OK. Now I will note that if you put your details in wrong, you won't necessarily get an error. So if you can't control your camera after this point, you might need to come back and do this again, just to make sure you got your details correct. If you're happy with everything you've put in on the screen here, press Enter, and then you can press Home. And now that our camera group is set to 1 and our camera is set to 1, I should be able to control the camera by moving the joystick, moving the zoom, or by pressing buttons on the touchscreen. On the touchscreen, you have options on the left-hand side to control camera functions, such as the white balance, the black balance, the speed, the exposure, and the focus. And on the right-hand side, you have the ability to create, store, and delete presets and traces that you create with the camera. Overall, this is a really versatile controller, and it's a great way of operating your PTZs. If you're running a bigger production that has multiple PTZs, or you're working on a slightly higher end production where you have a dedicated PTZ operator, then I definitely recommend having a look at the Canon RC IP1000 controller for controlling all of your PTZs. This controller is all singing, all dancing, and you can do everything from the initial setup of your cameras through to the operation without needing to use a computer. This controller can be powered with a power supply, or you can use power over Ethernet to give it power and IP control. This controller is incredibly easy to use, starting with the big touchscreen here, which shows you loads of information and also lets you control different functions just by touching the interface. Then around the outside, you have different groups of buttons and controls which focus on different things within the camera. So in the top left here, you have picture settings for controlling things like your white balance. Down here, you have controls for the cameras themselves, such as your zoom, focus, and a joystick for moving the camera, as well as buttons here to set which camera you're controlling, as well as choosing presets. In the top right-hand corner, you actually have controls for the controller itself. Now you'll notice that my laptop is nowhere in sight, and that's because you can do everything within the setup process on this controller itself. Let's start by going into the system settings by pressing the system button. And you'll see here we have lots of controls, but I'm going to move to the second page here, and you'll see we have our camera setup. From the controller, we can search for the cameras on our network by pressing the search button. And you'll see that it's showing us our brand new CRN300, which hasn't been configured yet. So I'm going to tap on that, and you'll see that it's our target camera now. I'm now going to set an administrator name and password for the camera. I'm going to put in here for my administrator name, just admin, although you can set this to be whatever you'd like. And then I'm going to put in a password, which I'm not going to tell you because you should always keep your password secret. I'm also going to confirm the password by typing it again, just to make sure that I haven't made a mistake with what I've set. And finally, I'm going to set up an IP address for my camera. Think of this like a telephone number almost for your individual devices on your network so that they all know how to talk to each other. IP networking can be quite complex, and unless you have a strong understanding of this side of computing, I think it's important to try and keep things simple. Something that I like to do with my productions and PTZs is to try and keep them all on their own independent network so that there's no confusion about how this works. I can just keep everything nice and simple and also portable as well. So no matter where I go, no matter which venue I'm in, I can just set up my cameras and it will be exactly the same as I set it up before I went to site. So to set up an IP address, start by pressing the IPv4 settings and change them to manual. From here we can set an IP address. Now by default, all of these cameras will have an IP address of 192.168.100 and then a number at the end. This number needs to stay between 0 and 255. Now as long as this number at the end, which currently is saying 112, as long as that number is unique compared to all of the other cameras and devices that you're using on this network, then you can leave it as it is. But if you did want to change it, you just tap, and then you can type in a different number. And press OK. You'll also see that you can change your subnet mask, which by default is 255.255.255.0. And if you're keeping it default and all of your cameras are keeping it default, then there's no need to change this. But you can change it by tapping on the button. Likewise, I'm going to leave my default gateway blank. But if you have a better understanding of IP networking, you may want to change these to fit within your network. Finally, push the apply button. Once you've set up your camera, you'll now need to go back to the first page of the system settings, and here we can select which camera we're going to register this as. I'm going to register this as camera 1, but you can register more than this by selecting from here. We can also check how we're going to connect to the camera, which is IP. And finally, on the right hand side, we can search for a camera matching this description, which is camera 1. And we can see that our little CRN300 here has been found. So I'm going to tap that, and it's already automatically populated the IP address that we set for the camera. The only other thing I need to do here is enter the administrator username, which I set as admin. And then I need to enter my password, which I'm going to keep a secret. There are some other options here if you're more familiar with networking, but for me, this setup is fine, so I'm going to apply. If for some reason you're having problems setting up your cameras, you might want to go to the second page and check the network settings for the controller itself. From here, you can set a manual IP address for the controller, subnet mask, and a gateway, just as you could for the cameras. So if you're having problems, check that you're using the same IP address format as your cameras, which defaults at 192.168.100 and then a number for the device. So now that we've set up our camera, we can start operating it. So I'm going to come out of the system settings by pressing the system button again, and then we can go into other settings such as our preset settings and the camera settings for controlling the exposure, white balance, focus, and picture quality. We can also press the picture button and bring up a preview of what the camera is framed on. This is great because you can see exactly what the camera is seeing, And you can also use these controls beneath the screens to control additional functions. For example, by pressing focus, we can use the screen to control what the camera is focused on. And as you can see, by pressing on the screen, I can change the focus area. We can go back by pressing button 4. Another feature that I love about this is that in addition to seeing individual cameras, I can also see a multi-view of different cameras on my network, so I can see all of the 4 cameras that I have on this table here from one screen, which means we don't have to run any additional infrastructure for giving our PTZ operator a view of their cameras. And you can also run an SDI connection into the controller so that your operator can get a return feed for the screen too. If you want to change which camera you're controlling, you can press the button below, or you can simply tap on the screen. From there you can use, for example, the joystick, the zoom rocker, and all of the other controls to control the camera. This makes it really easy to control multiple cameras in your setup, so you can just move them around, zoom them in and out, and you can also use these controls here to control the speed of the item that you're using on the controller. So that's this controller in a nutshell. There's so much that you can do with it when it comes to controlling your PTZ setup. I love this controller, and I'm most impressed by the multi-view because it just streamlines the setup. No more running additional cables to give your operator a return feed. You can just do it all from the controller. Faster setups, easier to use. What more could you want? When it comes to controlling your PTZs, Canon haven't held back. And a useful utility that you can download for your Mac or Windows computer is the Remote Camera Control application. This lets you control multiple PTZs as well as other XC protocol compatible cameras. Once the software is installed on your computer, you'll see an interface like this. Now I've already added a few cameras to the application, but if you want to add more, click on the menu in the top left, go to Camera Management, and then you'll see the ability to add cameras. So I'm going to click the Add button. Now conveniently you can search for cameras that are on your network. So I'm going to click Search Camera, and you'll see that the application has found my CRN300, which I have here. I'm going to click to highlight it, and then click OK. I can give the camera a name, which for this I'm going to call it CRN300, and then enter the username and the password as well. Click Connect, and you'll see that the camera has now been added to my camera list. I can now close this menu. On the left hand side you can now see all of the cameras that I have in the application, and I can start building up a multi-view with the different cameras. Currently this is set to be a 4x4 grid, but you can go to the settings, change the video layout, and choose a 1x1, a 3x3, a 1+5, or, like I've got now, a 2x2, which I'm going to keep. You can populate your cameras by clicking on them. So I've added my CRN300, my 100, my 500, and my 700, and they now all appear in the grid. To control the camera, click on its number, and that will give you controls on the right hand side to control the operations of the camera itself. You can control things like the pan, tilt, zoom, and focus, the presets, the picture settings, and more. You can also control multiple cameras by clicking all of their numbers, but you won't be able to control all of the features here. However, using this feature is really handy if you wanted to move all cameras in unison, for example, making them all tilt up, or making them all tilt down. Isn't that amazing? In addition to controlling them this way, you can also control them using a similar function to the web interface. So I'm going to deselect my additional cameras and return to controlling my CRN300. And you'll see in the top right hand corner, we have a drop down menu that lets me control what I'm changing on the camera itself. Currently it's off, but I can choose to change the focus or the centering. I'm going to change the centering. So, like the web interface, I can click on the image and the camera will move to center on the area that you've selected. If there are any functions of the camera that you'd like to change which aren't in this application, you can get to them very easily by clicking the cog setting underneath the camera in the camera list. So all in all, this is a really handy way of controlling multiple cameras from a computer. Another free application that you can download is the Multi-Camera Management app, which lets you control up to 200 cameras. You can do multi-view, backups and restores, firmware updates, and initializations and registrations, all from one place. It's an essential utility if you have multiple cameras. If you want to increase the capabilities of your PTZs, you can install add-ons, the first of which we'll talk about is the auto tracking application. This add-on lets your camera take some of the work off your shoulders. If you're filming someone delivering a talk, a lecture, or any other kind of presentation, and you want the camera to follow that person without missing a beat, this application is for you. You can access it through the web application for your PTZ. Go to the Other Functions tab. You'll see a section called Add-on, and if you click View, you'll see the add-ons that are installed on your camera. And that's right, they're installed on the camera itself. You don't need a computer or another device tethered to the camera for these add-ons to work. We have the auto tracking application installed here, but if your camera doesn't have this, you can download it from the Canon website. Select your application and click Open, and it will open a new tab with the application in it. This is the auto tracking application, and it's really easy to use. You have a preview of the framing of your camera and a silhouette over the top. And in short, all you need to do is make sure this silhouette matches the outline of the person that you want to track, and then start the application. And from there, the camera will do its work and follow them around. If the person leaves the frame, the camera will wait until they return and then pick them up again. And you can also do some exciting and fancy things, like setting exclusion zones and boundaries so that the camera doesn't go where you don't want it to. It's incredibly versatile and full-featured, and personally, it's one of my favourite things about these cameras. Another add-on is the Auto Loop application. Just like the Auto Tracking application, you can access it in the web browser, go to the add-on section, click View, and the Auto Loop application should be on the list. Click Open, and you'll be able to see a preview of the camera's image, as well as controls below. This application lets you add presets and control how the camera moves between them. You can control how long the camera stops on each preset, and also how long it takes to move between the presets that you select. These can be selected either through the loop mode or the back and forth mode. This add-on is great for things like music performances, where you may want to have presets of the drummer, the singer, the guitarist, and move between them automatically. Or you could use it for things like conferences and lectures, where you may just want a slow zoom in and zoom out that you can cut to make your recording much more dynamic. The final thing I'd like to talk about with these cameras is recording and streaming. We'll start with recording. Although these cameras have SD card slots, they don't record internally, so you will need an external recorder. You could use IP and use a software-based recorder on your computer, but you can also use HDMI and, on some models, SDI to get a higher quality recording. There are plenty of third-party recorders available, many of which have screens on as well, which make it easy to monitor what you're recording to. Some of them take SSDs, some take SD cards, and if you're already used to doing video production, there's a chance you might already have these for your other cameras as well. When it comes to streaming, you're also blessed with a variety of options because these cameras are incredibly versatile. First of all, you've got IP video. This manifests as NDI-HX, SRT, and RTMP as well. All of these can be used for slightly different things, but they basically let you send video over your Ethernet connection, either to other devices on your network or to the internet at large. This means that you can stream directly from these cameras to popular streaming sites. In addition to the IP connections, you also have HDMI and SDI for connecting to video switches. HDMI is very common and universal, and SDI is a great connection because you can lock the cable into the camera and also run longer SDI cables, such as across fields at music festivals. And if you're using one of the more entry-level models, you can use USB video and use them as a webcam, which is great for streaming through certain pieces of software on your computer, as well as using it for things like teleconferencing applications. I hope this has helped you get set up with your camera. Or maybe think about how you can use them for your own projects. Either way, best of luck with your productions.